we're here to hear about Diana Whitney and Alice Fogel. So Diana's going to go first. She graduated from Dartmouth College and Oxford University, where she was a Rhodes Scholar, and she attended the Warren Wilson College for the MFA program for writers. Her essays and poems have appeared in the Globe, in the Washington Post, and many others. I read a little bit of it. She has an irreverent parenting column called Spilt Milk, which has been syndicated in several newspapers. I don't know, is it still an active column?
No, it met its end.
And she is a yoga teacher by trade, and she runs the Core Flow Yoga out of a studio attached to her family's Victorian farmhouse in Brattleboro. Wanting It, which is published by the wonderful and local Harbor Mountain Press, is her debut book of poems. And Alice Fogel. Last year, Alice was appointed by the governor to be the New Hampshire Poet Laureate. She received her BA from Antioch and her master's from the University of New Hampshire. Living in Acworth, she has extensive teaching background, and she's currently teaching creative writing at Keene State College and also tutoring at Landmark College. She's the author of 3 poetry collections, and her poetry has appeared in numerous literary journals and anthologies and has been nominated 6 times for a Pushcart Prize. Reading Alice's list of other recognition, workshops, blogs, awards, grants, publications, and reviews that include words like luminous and brilliant and joy and meditative. Reading that list would take all night, so I won't. She will read selections from her collection published by Schaffner Press called Interval, and it was the winner of the 2014 Nicholas Schaffner Award for Music and Literature. Yeah. So without further ado, please help me welcome Diana Whitney.
How does that sound? Can I make it a little higher?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that. Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks so much, Liza, for that introduction. Thanks to everyone for coming out on this beautiful evening. And I'm happy to be here and reading with Alice. And because it's spring, I'm going to read some spring poems. In fact, mostly spring poems, although the bulk of this book is about winter. But a lot of it was written up in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom. So I'm going to start with Watched Pot. At the young farmer's dance party, the wife's 8 months gone, her belly a basketball, impossible drum, so round and taut under an Indian smock, so big it's hard not to reach out and touch it. She's like the great cloud of apple blossom wreathing the treetops, too radiant, too much life under skin. She sways in the fairy lights and I just watch, her eyes closed in a private dance, slight shimmy in her shoulders as her man works the sound, jumpy and earnest, spinning house and trance. Because I can, I throw my body around their room, shake my hair until the hot sweat runs. Wake in the morning like a child without dreams, and slowly remember I belong to no one. Stand at the stove with my white robe undone, waiting for the hot silver pot to boil. Don't tell me it always takes longer this way. I'm hungry to catch the first bubble rising. Then the rolling water receives the eggs, one by one, gently, like a pillow. So I'm going to read the title poem to this book, which takes place in high school. And I was lucky enough to be invited back to my old high school. And I had to decide whether I had the nerve to read this poem to the AP English class. And
Did you?
I did. I worked myself up about it. I was very nervous about what to wear. And then the irony was that I walked in there and it was 7th period on a Friday and they were about to have a pep rally. And so you can imagine it was very difficult to get people's attention, and I really wanted to have what I thought was going to be a meaningful discussion about power and identity. Anyways, I'll read you the poem and then I'll let you know what they said. It's kind of a risque poem. The teacher, the AP English teacher, granted me permission to read it. It's called Wanting It. Wasn't I beautiful? Wasn't I desperate? Didn't I give a shit about world peace, inner peace? Only wanting it, secret graffiti, spelled out in lip gloss on the locker room wall. The new underwire bit into my ribs, pushed me up and I caught the mirror, wanted it, cocked a hip, wanted it, front seat, back seat, down on the floor, brag of bruises blooming like plums on my neck, tender, bad, and legitimate. I wanted to ditch it, wanted to drive, alone in the car for the first time, silence, such concentration my hands tongued the wheel. I could see the brushstroke of each yellow line, could feel my tires crush pieces of gravel, and my 10 toes alive inside my shoes, firm and quick on the pedals. There was an orange lodged underneath the clutch. Squeeze it and shift, squeeze it and there. Those boys who juiced the halls with slouch and threw their bodies around the field, they watched when I punched it to second, third, burned my tracks along the high school tar. They looked at me as if I could kill them. They wanted to kill me back against a locker. I could feel my body jammed up on metal, my skin in ridges where the grates dug in, my skirt hiked up, my muscles like fish, my third eye watching from the outside in. I was some other girl. I was anyone's candy. So there was silence. Everyone, no one made eye contact. They kind of looked down at their Xeroxed copies of my poem that the teacher had given them. And I guess I was looking for the girls to raise their hands, and none of them did. Not the whole time. But, and then also that I mentioned the whole class, I was very worried about what I was going to wear, but I ended up wearing jeans because I didn't want to look too fancy. But they were dressed, it was Spirit Day, so they were all dressed in school colors, red and white, and most of them had their faces painted, so it was this very kind of primal experience. So one boy raised his hand and he said, "So what's the secret graffiti?" Which he wanted me to explain the line in my poem. And I had to say that's the point, that it's written in lip gloss, it's a secret, nobody understands this secret code of high school, you can't even see it. And I realized that there was some connection that I had been looking for this interaction that didn't happen. And eventually, I think I read them one more poem and then I left. And the bell rang and they went to the pep rally. So I'm gonna go back to kindergarten. This poem's called Marriage Story. Kindergarten was wood chips and Julio on my tail like a rocket through the playground. Black eyes and fast legs crawling in the tire tunnel. Breath on my turtleneck scrabbling the rope wall, bouncing me off the hanging walkway into the monkey bar house. Every recess he said he would marry me. He said it like a threat, like, I'm gonna kill you. And I knew if I ran too slow and he caught me, it was true. At home, my mother brushed my brown hair like a precious fleece, static crackling beneath satin ribbon as I cried for my future, for my new life with Julio. Even after the promises and parent-teacher conference, after recess inside and timeouts for Julio, I cried like the world was ending, which it was, because Julio proclaimed I would grow up and leave home, small prophet in corduroys staking his claim where boys stashed mosses and secret bones played out their terrible shouting games. I was fast, but I couldn't outrun them. In another forest, the girl glimpsed the gold, trick apple of love concealed in underbrush, and she slowed her sprint to gather it up. The last warrior who raced her caught her like this, reeled her in like a fish on a line. At night in the king bed, my yellow ring shines, bites my sleeping finger sometimes without warning. And someone else raised their hand and said, "Is that all you write about, boys and girls?" I said, "Yeah." But I also write a lot about the weather. So they weren't as interested in that. So like I said, a lot of the poems in this book, there's a whole section on winter, but I just decided I'm not gonna go there tonight because we've endured quite a long winter, so I'm just gonna go with the reveling in the season poems. This one is called Channeling. I told you May was too much, too much. Knee-deep in buttercups, I run again to the mountain, beat a path through drenched clover to the cut in the trees, that quiet arbor where woods transform into rainforest, luxuriant air at skin temperature, though I am almost skinless. I can feel the canopy photosynthesizing, green cells drinking light, making sugar. Sweet ferns unfurl in a spiral from curled packet to lush frond. Striped maple leaves spread wider than a man's palm. Stinging nettles edge the path beside wild geranium, but I slip past unscathed again to the summit where hunger surprises me, rising in a fever of chlorophyll and memory, your hand on my thigh, your words in my mouth, as I lie back on moss and grass open to the sky. Hot sun burns through cloud, and light blooms around my eyes, a tremor spiraling from deep within the body, leaving my fingers glazed with honey that smells of rainwater, leaves, mosses, and ocean. So from May to June. And the kind of June up in the Northeast Kingdom where you still have that memory of winter, that presence that never quite goes away, even on the hottest nights, especially when you're swimming. This poem is called Hindsight. It was the kind of night June was made for, a night worth twice its weight in syrup, lemon balm air like a soft, damp cloth, wrung and wrung by capable hands. It was a thick night you could eat alive, a souped-up night of steam and ginger, a night no one quite believed was real, except it was there and ripe for the picking, cash crop of love under the butter moon. The boys and girls slipped out of their skins, took the dark lake like a sidelong glance, parted the curtains of cedar wood as the firefly meteor shower began. One boy on the shore cupped a bug in his hands. It was cold light, perfectly efficient. He showed it to the girl dripping oil and water, how the bulb kept pulsing but gave no heat. The night spread a rumor, but the girl believed it. Her heart was a peach in a bowl of bones. His heart was the stone, and he hunted for insects, spelling her name in fire on the sand. He said, "Look, the moon's drawing water, meaning forecast, meaning rain," though she heard you are the halo, the weather, the circle of cirrus conjuring change. Then the night stepped out of its black chemise and lay its head across their laps. The pale night shone like a coin in a crack, and they fell to their knees to palm it. Night of fingers, night of tips, shameless night that would not sleep, pastille night she put under her tongue and sucked the sugar till sugar was spit. Then he slipped it quickly into his pocket, and it balled up small, picked up lint. It swallowed its pride and turned to a pebble, then a piece of gravel, then a speck of grit. So, I'm going to do one more summer poem, and then I'm going to do what I know is now okay, that you can read a few new poems, not just things from your book. So, I have a long summer poem in here called The Maine Dreams. and it's in 6 sections. And I don't usually read it aloud, but I thought I would just read section 1. It takes place on kind of where I used to spend childhoods in Maine. The Maine Dreams. A fish in the hand is an electrical charge. Wet life twitching for water. I couldn't kill it. A fish feels nothing like skin. I gave it to my brother, and he clubbed it hard, once, twice, on the top of the skull. Then it glazed quiet in the bottom of our boat. It's summer. The girls are learning they're beautiful. My lazy-eyed sister, 16 and golden. My dark cousin with her bra made of string. They wear chokers of shells, white shells like teeth, and old flannel shirts unbuttoned and frayed, faded blue of the lake at dusk, faded green of the island in rain. They understand the shirts only make them more lovely. They know how the razor irritates the skin, chafe and burn at the delicate leg crease as they oil themselves and braid themselves, and on the boathouse deck they murmur and paint, the harsh smell of acetone rising from their toes. It's summer. My mother is fishing from the dock. She arcs the rod back over her head, whips the invisible line to the rock pile, and reels slowly, watching the water, her silver blue Rapala swimming unfinned. Rustle of the stashed sail rolled around the mast. Rustle of the windsock hush of the deciduous. Half the long morning we're drunk with sleep. Black tea with milk, milky tea with sugar. We stagger the cabin until the dreams disperse, so many, so vivid, like feathers or milkweed, silk floating behind our eyes. If we try to trap them, they drift away, spinning. Sleep is a fish in Maine. It swims all night in the cabin's dark, in a lake made of blankets, an underground room, all of us in our deep, private drowning, before we wake and gasp, rinse off our faces, and I peel the curling scroll from the white birch and write it all down again. And then it goes on. It's interesting, this poem was written a long time ago, and the teenage sister who I write about in this poem is married and about to have a baby in a few weeks, and so I realize how poetry, if you draw elements from your life, it becomes a record of a memory, and a record of a family. And certainly my siblings who have read this book, that it wasn't my intention, but in some way it's become part of our family story, my version of what the summer was like. So I'm going to read a couple new ones, and I'll finish with one from the book. I'm really excited. This poem won a prize. It's the first time I've won a prize since I was in graduate school, long time ago. So I'm excited, but I also just want to qualify because the same poem which got selected was also rejected by like 24 places. So if there are any writers in the room, then you know what I'm talking about. And it's been a really interesting lesson about how random this process is and subjective, and that I think I was riding this wheel. I think the Buddhists have it pleasure and pain, or elation and despair. Either you've been affirmed or you've been denied, and instead I'm trying to kind of take the middle path, either with the good news or the bad. So that said, this is the first poem I ever wrote about my children. Before I wrote the column, Spilt Milk, which was my parenting column, about the baby cave. And then I went off and I wrote, poetry about an imaginary lover in the woods. But this is the first time I put my kids in the poem. And so I found it interesting that was the one that spoke to Ellen Bass, who was judging this contest. So it's called Curiosity, and it has an epigraph from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Resistance is useless. On the northbound lane following the river, I try to explain about horse paths, cart paths, earth eaters, the first dozers and rollers laying hot tar over centuries of dirt. My daughters still believe whatever I say, mine me for knowledge practical and vast. Could the moon have a moon? Ava asks. And I don't know, it probably could have some asteroid chip or space station trash snagged into orbit, natural satellite, a crushed Coke can, or a bottle cap. But it wouldn't last. We can't steer the mothership. The girls want me always in the kitchen like a planet, steady sphere with gravitational pull, slow burn on the horizon all night, anchoring their dreams in flannel and cold cream. They want me cut loose on the tramp, big crazy bounces playing Simon Says and moonwalk chase. Curiosity, the Mars rover, found water in red dunes, trace molecules, ices, thin film in fine dust. We hunted the meteorite deep on museum bedrock, pitted hunk of solid iron, radiant in the velvet dark. 34-ton heart from the asteroid belt, burned into being 4 billion years old. Carmen ran pell-mell through the hall of human history, past Cro-Magnon skulls and femur bones, past DNA spiraling slow in a glass case, to see what she'd been promised, to lay her cheek against the cool, hard evidence of space. What was interesting about this poem is that my kids got to read it, and my older daughter said, "No, but Mommy, that's not true. We don't want you always in the kitchen." and she wanted me to change it. She said, if you take out that word, always. And then I kind of had to claim my perspective and say the poem was written from a moment, from that feeling, and then also the difference between reality and truth. So I'm proud to say that I wrote my first sonnet, and who knows whether it's a successful sonnet, but after years of being advised by my different writing teachers that I should try writing in form and resisting, feeling like it would be too constraining, I found that I absolutely loved it. So I think maybe I'll read 2 sonnets. This one is called Springtails, and that's another word for snow fleas, which come out at the end of winter. Springtails. I didn't plan to meet you in the woods, strange mist rising from the wet snowpack, drifting among the gray trunks, old sugar bush drawing us back and back to the origin of seasons, the veins of spring easing open, running clear, black dust in our footsteps, the first vast migration of snow fleas working up from soil to the thawing surface, tiny animals like scattered ash or pepper risen to feed on sap. Wingless, they spring rashly in our tracks, blind hope emerged to bear us witness. One warm, wet day, a window briefly open, a window closed again, and all refrozen. And one more from that season, Sugar Maker. The heat lamp in the hen house burned all night, all day. The birds scratched hopefully at snowpack, as you tap, tap, tapped the cold bark looking for a vein. Drill and hammer, freeze and thaw, lion and lamb blown raw by the winds of marriage, slush-ravaged hens huddled in plywood and sawdust. I crushed the secret like pitch pine tips, carried my fragrant hands close to my chest, waited for mud season's slow revelations, mist and murk rising from the remains of winter, first drops plunking buckets, a reminder. Sap run in muck boots, steady as rock maple you come with your pails slopping over, sugar maker at the steaming arch, tending our dark amber. My husband makes maple syrup in our backyard. Literally outside, not in a house. So I think I have time for one more. And I'll go back and read another summary kind of poem from the book. I guess this is probably another June poem. The Grove. I'm not the heady sweetness of my mother's peonies, collapsed in a snow of petals on the floor. I'm the ruffled vein of crimson at the center, the flower's ecstatic story. I'm not the girl bowed like a lady slipper, coyly shading her eyes from the sun. I'm the pitiless goddess bathing in moonlight, quiver full of silver arrows, keen to deliver painless death to any mortal who dares to watch. My body is strung like a bow. I'm the thunderhead and electrified air, the poem and the source of the poem. I am a conduit, a clear channel, a convergence of streams, the grandmother wolf maple cleaved at the crest of the hill, the apple tree hollowed to reveal a tunnel, an aperture in which you can place your gift, fruit or flower, jewel or seed. I'm the hushed fingertip of the purple foxglove, my speckled throat open to morning rain, my leaves flushed with toxins to heal a failing heart. I'm 1,000 flaming tongues of honeysuckle exploding in bloom like a fever dream, falling in a torrent off the side of the house, solid walls I abandon in order to pray. The God carries me into the grove. He lays me down like an offering in ferns and leaf litter, cherishes me with his lips and hands until my gold skin is flecked with black forest soil. Thank you so much. Did you want to do questions now, or should Alice read and we do them after?
Either way.
What do you guys want to do?
Keep reading and then.
Yeah, let's have the poetry. So, here comes Alice.
Nice reading, Diana. Good evening. Because this book is really built off of a concept, I'm going to talk about that a little bit and also read some poems from it, of course. So this book, Interval, is poems based on Bach's Goldberg Variations. And the way that it came about was I had written 3 books of lyric poetry, very nature-based. I had done a little experimenting with form, but I was tired of what was coming out when I wrote. I wanted to surprise myself and hear something different. So I thought I would really like to play with structure. And at the same time, as someone who really loves music, I thought, wouldn't it be cool to kind of steal and also semi-invent, along with the stealing, a structure from a piece of music and use that somehow to create poems. So I listened to a lot of different kinds of music for a while. I was actually originally thinking about trying to use traditional music from different cultures around the world, and realized after a while that I just didn't have a clue what I was dealing with. So because I had some background in classical music, I started listening more to that, and because the Goldberg Variations are a full-length piece of music made up of parts, I thought that would make more sense to try to write a book of poems, because it would become a full-length collection made up of parts. So I spent years studying and listening to the Goldberg Variations, trying to play them, which you'll never hear me do, but I do it alone in my living room. And so I learned a lot about how the whole thing was built. And there is a little introduction in the book talking about the structure of the music and how I tried to borrow it. So I won't go into a lot of detail about that. But just some really basic things are, so the main thing about music that I feel is that music is a mathematical structure of intervals and durations, and yet it affects us on such a spiritual level, or at least an emotional level, way beyond just form. And I think that is also echoed in who we are as people, that we are in these forms and we're confined to these forms, and yet we feel pretty sure that that's just not exactly who we are, or that's not all we are. There's more than that on some level. So I wanted to work on that theme. So the theme of the book became threshold states of being, like these intervals of time, intervals where we're between one state of being and moving into another, kind of. So that theme of spirit and embodiment is really what's behind the whole book. And most of the poems are in the voices of people or characters that I was channeling or creating. And then some of the poems are from more like a state of being as opposed to an identity. So, and that's because of how it matches with the music, but I won't go into that. So let me just start to, well, I wanted to say one other thing, which is that even though I spend a lot of time listening to this music and using the structure and really thinking about how to write a cohesive piece of a book of poems made up of many parts that would have a similar theme, you don't have to know the Bach to read the poems. It's a book of poems. You don't have to get how I managed to match up a voice, a character with that variation. It's a process that I went through, but I wouldn't really worry about it too much. And if you listen to the music and you say, why is that a baker, or why is that a fish? It's just my subjective interpretation of the tone or the mood of that piece. So the book, just like the music, starts with an aria that sets the themes, and the themes are mortality, identity, self, that kind of thing, body and spirit. Bach was using all these different forms of music in his time, stealing from different forms, dance music, pub music, and so I thought it would be fun to play with a lot of different poetic forms as well, experimental, narrative, lyrical. So the first one I'm going to read is the title poem, Interval. It's variation number 2, and it's a little bit more experimental, and it's not in the voice of a specific being, it's in just the interval. And one thing that was really on my mind when I wrote this was the interval between when if we pray, the interval between saying God and then saying the prayer. There's this moment of, what if I actually get heard and it's my time to be called out? Uh-oh. So there's this terror, there's this moment of terror before you can actually say, have mercy on me. Wait, I just wanted your attention for a moment. Would you please do this for me? Or can I thank you for this, or whatever? So there is that little interval of hope and terror. Interval. If in the temporal world of the measure of plenitude that spans the vast interstice, hanging in the balance between the invocation and the prayer, O holiest interval, there were no mercy, and God, the invention, said, yes, I'm here, you rang, why tarry? Say, yes, yes, I am ready. Death is for being done with finitude. If in the temporal plenitude the measured world hung in that vast spin, if in the world of interstice measured in balanced spans, if in the hung invocation, O Lord, O world, the prayer were no mercy, if God tarried in if, if in the unmeasurable interval, the holy plenitude of yes, a merciful intervention, if God rang in the balance between here and the holy, why invoke the vast tally if, between ready and death, God said, yes, you prayerful span of being, I am done, I am death, for finitude, why say, if why is? So the next one I'm going to read is Variation 6, and it's in the voice of a snake. Most of the characters are humans, but there are some animals, and there's also some like non-embodied things. I don't know, spirits. And there's also a transplanted heart. There's a bunch of different speakers. There's also masses of speakers, like in the first person plural in some of them too. So the snake one, actually the snake doesn't use the word I, maybe because the snake has a sense of being something beyond I, but it is the voice of the snake. Have use of edges, alongside field, crosshatched trees to their meadow pedestal. Way is seam, here beneath eaves, where, when further forest rises and effaces sun, camouflaging silver bleed congeals. Smaller than rivers, go sleek like rivers, and like rivers slip unseen below earthly surface things. Pour with invisible volition between storm-tamped weeds, slip clear through stone to lick fresh linings of eggs. Chromatic curvature, scale horizon's arc littered with all closest, slightest movements of toad and vole, small measures of hungry sight. More beautiful than wind, more grounded than birds, more clever and calm than time. What more need for body than this? To crush sloughed leaves with slim sounds no louder in heaven than none. Migrate through tunnel skin meant to briefly burrow in. Emerge clean, removed, and hunt whole again. So through the book, these themes of embodiment kind of keep on cycling through, and there may be words or images that repeat again and again. And because Bach was writing in canons and fugues, which are sort of overlapping layers of voices, that was one of the reasons for me to have these voices speaking in the poems. And so there's often an implied you who's being spoken to, or maybe there's they being referred to, and there's I speaking. So there's all these layers of identity and questions about, who are we and what is it all about? I'll probably read you some that are a little bit more easy to hear, the voice in a minute, but I'm going to keep on challenging us for a moment more. So the next voice that I'm speaking from is a potter, someone who's making pots on a wheel. And in this one, you could read the poem. It's actually written twice, once in italics and once not, and so it looks like this on the page. Think of it almost like this. But I'm going to read it the way it's written so that you're going to hear lines doubled over. And this is actually a poem that goes with a canon, where there's a theme or a voice, like a melody, and then a little while later the melody comes again. So it's repeated, but because they're overlapping, it becomes harmony happening. I can't mimic that with my voice. It would be really cool to have two people reading this at the same time so that you would hear one line on top of another line. Maybe I'll try that sometime. But this is the Potter. Wheel of becoming, wheel of twin firmaments, I work you round, wheel of becoming, wheel of twin seasons, earth-cupped firmaments, I work you round in my rough hands, slip water, seasons, earth-cupped, over the island, in my rough hands, slip water of clay on the heavenmost, over the island, circle, warm to the fire, of clay on the heavenmost, of friction turning under my feet, circle warm to the fire, its body upraised with breath, of friction turning under my feet. I pull past each shape, its body upraised with breath, my own surface in flux over the bending. I pull past each shape, bones within, the clay changing, my own surface in flux over the bending, like air exhaled by the moment, bones within, the clay changing, and my fingertips lose their swirling, like air exhaled by the moment, lines that imprint me as unique, and my fingertips lose their swirling, fill with the swelling red medium, lines that imprint me as unique, predicting my future, fill with a swelling red medium, absence, predicting my future, at the same time, absence, the clay takes my identity, at the same time, stealing the infinitesimal designs. The clay takes my identity of my skin for its own smooth side, stealing the infinitesimal designs, another and another shape it isn't, of my skin for its own smooth side, taking its place in the spinning nape, another and another shape it isn't, of its risen working, its sliding, taking its place in the spinning nape, ride between opposing fissions of its risen working, its sliding of my fingertips, soon one eye fixed, ride between opposing fissions in time, after all the spun of my fingertips, soon one eye fixed, worlds of eyes in time, after all the spun, but world of eyes, not yet, but not yet, not yet, not yet. All right, I'm going to try to find one that's just more of a straightforward voice. Okay. How about this guy? This is variation 22. It's called The Equivocator. It's just a guy who can't commit. He's a stereotype. He's having an argument. He's addressing somebody who's obviously asking him to, like, do you love me and are you going to commit? So this is, I'm sorry, I think of him as a he. He's definitely a he. There's nothing identifying him as a he in the poem, but that's just who I am hearing. So here he goes. Say that love is a love that cannot die, so that if it does, it is not a matter neither created nor destroyed, and isn't love. Or was it? So that to have loved and lost is never to have loved at all. Can love never die with impunity? Is suicide love's only way out? Say love is molecular, pheromones, phoneme, idea. Can't it have two or more sides? What if the loved object dies, and the love is without object? Then what is the object of love? Or if the object lives, I know, but let's just say, and the love takes another subject to love. Can love not translate, multiply, commute? Can love never be plural, pluperfect, nor plural, sorry? Would you have it be censored, suppressed? Say love was a love that died. Say love never loved, did what it pleased, made its own choices, got a cat. Or that a love unloved was nevertheless itself a love, and could, if it wanted. Say love is a love defined by love itself, loves itself, knows nothing but itself, is always one and the same. Is love a mirror, a point, spiral, sphere, a line? What? So say love could wait for us to die, or could wait forever to love its true love, who's waiting, so that in waiting to love, it's still a love, although true, unloved, and so perhaps is dead, unless that isn't love. Okay, I'm going to try one more of the one that's from a state of being after something really difficult has happened, rather than from the voice of a person in a state. So this one is variation 14. It's called Hereafter. It's 2 words, not the hereafter, but hereafter. After what will happen has happened and is done, begin. Here in the infinity of aftermath, in the dying echo of the echo died down, in the dark patch after the last light flash, in the pain of knowledge after the knowledge of pain, in everything. Every subject rhymed with the undeniable, what happened, now, however much, denied. No place beyond its blistered realm, no time outside its frame. Every word uttered wrung from it, every gesture touched with it, every expression visibly limned with its brine. In the quickened heart of its doneness, in the radius of its eternal dissolve, never the dispelled, ever the dispelling, regardless of giving up, forever the given, irrelevant to forgetting, henceforth no, or yes, the vast, vast after, inescapable, atmospheric, overpopulated, prehistoric continent of afterness, useless regret for, no return to, untenable grieving over, unattainable relief from, the irretrievable, unrelivable before. Happened, but after, begin. In the life hereafter, in the long obsessive moment after the moment, after, what would happen, did happen, and is done. I'll just read one more. This one is also more of a state. This is how it looks on the page. It's an image of rowboats lined up on the shore upside down, rather than being right side up on the water. So among the things that are intervals, very things that poets love, impermanent things, shadows, reflections, life and death, love and loss. These are all themes of poetry all the time. So things like that, those images, the boats that were upside down, they always stop me in my tracks and enter into poems. So this one is the boats. It's variation 29. And one of the things that variation 29 does, it's really beautiful. It's got this, the music is kind of vibrating almost. It goes back and forth, bah, 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 like this, like it's like, and if you're playing it, your hand is really doing this kind of thing. It's like a back and forth thing. And there's a lot of back and forth in these variations. Anyway, there's hands crossing, there's up and down the scales. So lots of, in and out and overlapping, crossing, that kind of stuff. but that this vibrating of the music kind of seeming to repeat itself and waver influenced some of the language that I used in this and how I used it. Boats. Boat after boat after boat after boat, hulls bottom up beside the hushed lake, cold abandoned boats, scaled notes up and down along the staff of shore. Boat after boat after boat pulled up the slope, overturned, overarched, under the arc of sky. Crouched like soldiers, faces hidden, whelmed at the ground. Prisoners of other wars, tethered, tree-tied, locked and chained. Boat after boat bound to the hard dirt bank and left to splinter dry all winter long. Sundown pastelling the illuminated lake, lake mirroring everything. Water's smooth proof of boat after boat, shore boat, lake boat, dome, bowl, the shined flip side of the other hand, because down the long inclined far shore, beneath that wooden road of rowboats heavy, scattered side by side, light boat doubles float like lake's own remembrance of their dead weight, once lofted easily, like heroes on its back. More boats oppositely upside down, cupped, two wrongs making one right side up against the depth of water pressed to the sky. Below, birds flow, past trees and cloud, fish nod, and reflected in the skimming light borrowed from a dimming sky, boat after borrowed boat, borrowed by water, by land. Oh, boat, boat, spirit boat, I only wish that I might too hover on the battlefield of another shore, neither adrift nor drowned. Thank you. So I did want to see if anybody had any other questions about the book and the poems, or how this all worked, and also if you have questions for Diana, she can come back up too. Yes.
Did you listen to the pieces as you wrote?
Oh, like for years, constantly. Yeah, constantly. And the way that I wrote this book was really different from how I'd ever done it before. I just I never typed anything up for about 3 years. I just wrote them, and I didn't want anything to solidify until I really got how it was all going to work, and which pieces, which voices were going to go with what. Sometimes it was really obvious to me, and other times it wasn't. So I had to listen to it all the time. I have about 12 different recordings of it. Yeah.
Because you're also interested in the intersection of music, poetry, and math, have you considered or written ballads?
I guess I would say I've sort of written some things like that, but not like purposely to put to music. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to write songs, but I haven't really tried to do that so much. I mean, in a way, some of these are almost like ballads because they're somebody telling their story, kind of. It was really different for me because I hadn't written in narrative form really before.
Yeah. That was wonderful, Alice. I actually have a question for Diana, just to get you in the conversation.
Yeah.
So what did you like about writing in forms, and especially in the sonnet form? What did you find that it gave you? What did it allow you, or did it constrain you? What did it allow you to say, or you know what I'm saying? How did you experience the form itself, and how is it different from what you usually do?
Well, I found it like a puzzle, like fitting the pieces of a puzzle together. And once I kind of got it, it was really thrilling. And then, and this I don't mean to demean it at all, but there was a way that it was easier. because I knew when it was going to end. Because that's always the question when you're writing a free verse poem, is how long is, I mean, not just is it in one long stanza, or is it in 2 lines, or how is it arranged on the page, but when does it end? And then with the sonnet, there's that satisfaction, especially if this is the final couplet. You know, whether, even if it's, you know, there's sonnets that don't even rhyme, and that I found that I really love that. And so I kind of wrote what I thought was a lot. I don't think I'm a prolific writer, but I wrote like 7 or 8 of them in a short period of time. And so then the more that I did, the more I understood just both. It also seemed to make me sometimes more flexible, because I was forced into syntax that I wouldn't normally do. And so it kind of it both pushed me a little bit, and then also was friendly because of the container that it gave. And I liked the puzzle. Like, sometimes I would even find like where the ending was going ahead of time, and then have to work backwards. And I also don't usually write poems that are that short. I mean, it felt very short and very compressed, and so how do you actually say something in that time? And that's why I wrote a bunch, and it's like, who knows? What I did was I had to give myself permission that I'm just going to experiment. I called it like a sonnet study, the way if you were taking a class, and it wasn't that any of them were going to necessarily see the light of day. But it was for my own learning. So.
And what kind of sonnets did you write?
I guess I just did that. I did the Shakespearean A B C D C D E E. I did a little of the Italian. I tried that, but that was much harder and didn't feel as natural. And then I did some that had a much looser rhyme scheme, like wasn't exactly, but I felt like if I was really going to do it, I should do at least some that really held it, and then I would know when I was going to go ahead and break. And the iambic pentameter was interesting too, and at first I had to beat it out, and then I realized that so much of what we write falls into iambic anywhere, right? So and then I showed one, actually that one I read, Springtails, I showed it to Jean Valentine, who is just a wonderful poet. And she told me, she said, well, why do you have these extra words here? And I said, well, I'm trying to get 10 beats. I'm trying to get the iambic. She said, no, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that anymore. So I realized once I had the full thing, I could go back and actually edit. And so maybe there were lines that just had 8, that it wasn't too wordy.
Do you know Diana Hacker's?
No, in fact, I'm interested if people have suggestions now of sonnets to read. I want to do Seamus Haney, but I don't know hers.
No, Love and Death and the Changing of the Seasons.
Oh,
It's
great.
an amazing sonnet. I think
Whole
it's like a
sequence?
crown.
Okay.
Crown, okay. And she has villanelles thrown in there. I'm just gonna maybe just do a villanelle
Yeah.
while I'm kind of resting from doing my sonnets. I mean, it's pretty, but it tells a story. And they're really some of the most amazing contemporary
great.
sonnets that I've ever read.
That's a great suggestion.
Marilyn Hacker.
Marilyn
Hacker.
Hacker. Okay, yeah, I have read some of hers, but this is
Hacker's.
Love and Death. I don't think I've read that one.
Yeah,
Love and Death.
Love and Death, which is from Keats.
Yeah.
These are the subjects of poetry, Love and Death and
So
the
the
Changing
Changing of the Seasons. Great. I just read a brand new book of songs that just came out called Paradise Drive by a.
Oh, that's incredible.
Did you just read
Yeah,
that?
no.
Yeah, I actually want a book. I want to write a book
That's-
review on it. Yeah, it's all sonnets, and they're like 21st century. Paradise Drive.
Drive, sorry.
Yeah, Rebecca Faust. She's a Marin County writer, and I actually at first was a little shocked because she's in these swanky parties in Marin County, and she's writing.
She's reading in the bathroom.
She's reading in the bathroom, but you know, she's writing about people and their, you know, fancy stilettos and. Anyways, it's not necessarily, you know, it's not some nature sonnet. But she really uses the form brilliant. So I'm going to write that down, Marilyn Hacker.
I'm want to talk to Alice a little bit. I've read very carefully your introduction over and over again to understand the way you've constructed your whole book. And I find it so fascinating, the rules you set for yourself and the way you work variety into the rules. You know, you have the number of lines in a poem and the area and then I don't remember all the terms, but it's all very formally thought out, the way the Bach Goldberg variations are. And yet within that, you've created such a great amount of variety and difference.
Well, that's what he did too. I mean,
I
you
understand.
can't beat him for the variety.
That's
and,
true.
And
but
the structure. I mean, it's insane how complex that structure is.
Yeah.
But when you listen to it, it's just, it's just beautiful music. You don't have to know the structure of it.
But it's such a wonderful voyage to have looked at this music and then constructed a book that is framed by the same kind of forms and things like that.
I think it's a lot like what Diana was saying about when you have a structure, it forces you to be creative in a
Yeah,
different way.
exactly.
So I almost feel like it's cheating to have a structure or something. It's like, it's so great. It's like being held, somehow, and so you can then pretend that you're flying because there's somebody holding you up.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how, given that there was all this structure and a long time you worked on this book, did you find it that you were going back and forth between, I know you were writing other poems at the same time, and in terms of how do you go from the state interval in those poems and that structure to other kinds of poems you're writing at the same time?
I may not have written much of other stuff, and there were definitely a lot of folks that didn't make it in here, who were originally part of those voices. So I think I was just so obsessed with what I was doing here that I probably wasn't really doing anything else for those years. And it was also years when my kids were young and I had to just concentrate in a focused way because there wasn't a whole lot of free time in between those times.
I was tuned into the vowel cycles a lot, especially in the boat poem. It seemed to me that you were playing with all kinds of O's all over the place, and it sounded very musical. Were you doing that by design? Were you playing with sounds?
Always. I mean, the sounds
but
the sounds are
different,
like
especially in a kind of Bachian way. I mean, were you doing it to make it a variation of sound as well as other stuff?
I guess that's a lot of what I'm aiming to do most of the time anyway. I mean, sometimes like there are phrases in the music that would be like da 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 da, and so I would write something that had those syllables, that amount of syllables in that rhythm. And so there are times when I'm definitely working off of, but I didn't do that like for every phrase. I probably could have tried to do that, but I didn't do that. So, but the sounds are really, really important to me.
I want to ask you both a question using a line from one of your poems, Alice. And I think the line is something like, "Can love have more than two sides?" And that seems to me to describe poetry, actually. That poetry, perhaps unlike prose, has way more than two sides. You've both been reading a lot this past year, Alice as New Hampshire State Poet Laureate, and Diana, I know you've been all over the place with your new book. I wonder, based on the people you've encountered at the various readings, why do you think poetry commercially, if it has so many sides, why commercially do you think it still seems to appeal to a relatively limited audience if its scope is large?
That's a great question. Do you want to start or I can?
Well, I mean, I talk about this stuff a lot as, in my role as, going around New Hampshire in particular. I talk a lot about accessibility, the red herring of accessibility, that people somehow feel like when they read a poem, they're supposed to be getting some information.
Yeah.
And so if they don't get that information right away, they feel duped or stupid or something. And I try to say that the poems are not about, I mean, you know, things are accessible to us only when we've studied them and know them, you know, like you know, if you work on car engines, they're accessible to you, but they're not to some of us. So it's just such a non-point whether something's accessible or not. So I think once people really let themselves open to poems and let the poems into them, then it's an experience that they don't have to get it. It's not about getting it. But I mean, I think that most people value poetry. Teachers value it. We use it at occasions, weddings, funerals, you know, so we know it's important, but we forget about it a lot. It's part of our culture to just, you know, be practical and pragmatic and busy and get your work done, and then you go to bed and, you know, you crash into bed. We don't make time for the mysteries or the strangenesses or the dwelling in a moment of time or a memory, or, you know, we don't make that a priority in our lives enough. So it's not just poetry that's, you know, shunted, it's a lot of other aspects of humanity. On the other hand, I have to say that as I've been traveling around New Hampshire, I've been really blown away with how many people are into poetry of all different backgrounds, ages, and types, and they're really, people really do like the stuff. Who knew?
Yeah, actually that, I just read an article on the Huffington Post. I found it through Twitter, which I just joined 2 days ago. But it was, I think, written maybe by one of the Academy of American Poets people, or some higher up on one of the big poetry forums around the country. And what she was claiming is that every year during April, all the newspapers love to talk about the death of poetry. Yet, she came forward with all of this evidence that there are actually more poetry readers than the media would have us think. And she talked about the poem a day. I don't know if anybody gets that.
Yeah.
That has over doubled. So there's like 120,000 people who get poem a day. That's a lot of readers.
And there are many poems a day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess she was talking about their poem a day. But then she talked about some survey, kind of like the census, where they were trying to gauge people's habits. And you mentioned the weddings, because they asked people apparently on this survey if they listened to music and danced at weddings, and people said yes, but they didn't ask if they heard poems at weddings. So what this information we're getting about poetry not in people's lives, you know, it may not be as accurate, because, you know, my siblings, I've had a sibling get married every summer for like the past 3 years, and what do they come to, not just me, but to other people to read poetry. And in the schools too. I mean, you might know more. I've done a little bit of poetry with my daughter's 4th grade class, and they're not yet studying poetry, at least in our school, but they were really open to it. You know, 9 and 10-year-olds, and maybe somewhere in there it gets a bad rep.
It's probably a conversation we can spend all night on.
Yeah.
So maybe we should, you know, end it here, and
Yeah.
then and we'll stick around to sign books and just to talk one-on-one with people.
Thank you.
Thank you.